Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Veeam Data Center and Cloud Digital Series. This is our second of 4 events that are focusing on the domain of data protection, all things backup and disaster recovery. You can find more information about our upcoming events at rogers.com/DC events. That's rogers.com/DC events. I'd like to introduce myself this afternoon. I'm James Tantram, the Director of Product Management for Data Center and Cloud here at Rogers for Business. I'm really accountable for the commercial management and delivery of our co-location, our cloud, managed services, and of course our data protection products. At Rogers Data Centers, our mission statement is really to help organizations realize the full potential of their digital transformation initiatives through the adoption of multi-cloud. Multi-cloud is about helping organizations achieve the right balance of cost, performance, control, scalability, and of course always be secure through the adoption of cloud, co-location, on-prem, and hyperscaler technologies. Very lucky to be joined today by Robert von Meeren. Robert is a sales engineer or systems engineer at really one of the leaders in the data protection domain, which of course is Veeam. Robert comes to us today from the Alpharetta office of Veeam. He is an experienced software technical support engineer, and most recently with GE Healthcare, and joined Veeam back in November of 2018. He has a Bachelor of Business Administration focused on IT from Keenshaw State University. So what is it that we're trying to achieve today? What's the agenda? Well, Veeam is really going to walk us through how data protection and how backup can be a very critical and important tool in protecting against the current threat of ransomware. We know actually through Veeam and recent surveys that, in terms of 2020, the top concerns for businesses when it comes to data protection is essentially ransomware and protecting against ransomware, and of course recovering from ransomware when it does strike. And the second really being the lack of or the challenges with respect to finding those critical IT skills and resources that can really ensure that services and products like Veeam are implemented and are operating. So we'll get through really what ransomware is about, how it is transmitted and how it infects organizations, really some of the costs that we're seeing within the market in terms of recovering and getting back access to that data. Of course, going into Veeam, who they are as a technology vendor, what their technology platform provides for, and what its solutions. And then we'll talk a little bit about just what's happening in the domain of Office 365 and backup. One of the big misconceptions that I consistently hear from the market and from customers is the assumption that by simply being in the cloud, that data is protected and is secure. And in fact, if we look at Office 365 and the terms of service, it is what's known as shared responsibility model. And it's very clear in that model that it is actually the customer, the end tenant, that is responsible for data, protecting that data and backing up data. And so we'll talk about, one of the ways that Veeam really helps protect the data that lives in that Office 365 environment that's become so ubiquitous, particularly over the last 6 months or so with COVID. So we'll talk a little bit about Rogers and introduce Rogers. As mentioned, Rogers' mission really is to help organizations realize and harness the power of hybrid cloud in terms of truly realizing their digital transformation potential. And the way we achieve that is really by bringing a mix of solutions to the table in terms of solving for business and IT challenges. And the way we approach those challenges is really by looking across the breadth of technologies available, whether it's continuing to leverage investment and hardware that exists on-prem or in a co-location facility, whether it's harnessing really the power of cloud, whether that's private cloud or public cloud, ensuring that all of the data and workloads that are hosted in those environments are secure and protected, and really by bringing all of those components together, organizations really can achieve and realize the power of a hybrid cloud solution where that infrastructure is optimized to the actual workload and really delivers on the right cost profile, the right flexibility, the right elasticity, and of course is secure. So, one of the things that we're seeing, and it really does tie into, digital transformation as well, is just how important business continuity is. Disaster recovery and backup are, and it's more evident than ever. When we think about the impact of downtime, on businesses that are increasingly running remote and running digital, we're talking about loss of productivity that spans obviously employees that are now working from home and cannot access critical business applications. We're talking about customers that can't consume digital experiences and procure digital services. And so really has come to the forefront over the last 6 months or so, just how important it is for organizations to have, one, a robust business continuity plan that really defines the end-to-end process, systems, and methodologies through which a business recovers from really any disaster or loss of a business process or system. And of course, the part of any robust business continuity plan is a robust data protection or a disaster recovery plan that ensures that IT systems can be recovered and be up and running in the least amount of time possible. Veeam Cloud Connect is one of the products that falls within the Rogers Data Protection portfolio. Veeam Cloud Connect is really part of the feature set within the Veeam Backup and Replication platform. What it allows organizations to do is really leverage and target the cloud as a data repository for their backups. And what that does really in a matter of minutes, it's incredibly simple, a couple of clicks through the Veeam console, you're able to get to that 3-2-1 rule that is just so critical and I think foundational to having a robust data protection strategy in place. And 3-2-1 is really having 3 discrete copies of data on at least 2 different medium and at least one of those being offsite. And Veeam Cloud Connect allows really a +1 on each of those components. It gives you that 3rd copy. It gives you that 2nd medium, which is of course cloud-based, separate from disk and separate from tape. And it leverages the cloud to really be that offsite or secondary location that ensures that data can be recovered if there was some kind of critical failure at that primary location. Why is Rogers the right partner really in terms of data protection services? And I'll run through this quickly to really get into the ransomware discussion. One, we host all of our data protection services inside our Canadian Tier 3 data centers. And so those data centers are really built to serve the privacy and security needs of the Canadian business. And so we have the experience, the policies, controls, and evidence to really protect data, whether it's SOC, has SOC requirements, ISO, or HIPAA or PIPEDA requirements. We are data sovereign, so being a Canadian operator and Canadian owner of data centers, it means your data never leaves a Canadian jurisdiction. This is becoming so critical for organizations that are federally regulated, whether they're healthcare, whether they're financial services, or whether they're part of really the public sector supply chain. Keeping data in Canada and secured within data is becoming paramount. We are a full service and support oriented organization, meaning every product and service that we sell comes with really an end-to-end support model that walks you through every step of the journey, whether it's understanding the products, onboarding to the products, and ultimately the best practices and processes to follow when using those products. There's someone that you could speak to at every step of that journey. And I think finally, and most important when it comes to cloud-based data protection, Rogers never charges egress fees for accessing and validating data. This has become a key concern and a key hurdle with cloud-based technologies. The majority of public cloud providers will charge in order to validate or recover data from their cloud platforms. And those costs can be substantial if you're looking at recovering large databases and so forth. Rogers never charges to egress data from our cloud, and that allows data to be validated and to ensure that data has integrity at any time without penalty. So with that, Robert, we'll really transition to you, and let's get a better sense of just what's happening with ransomware and how we can protect against it.
Yeah, really appreciate that, James. And that was a really great introduction. Like we said, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about ransomware as a whole, what Veeam and what we're seeing in the industry with customers, maybe give some specific examples, then kind of dial in specifically on Veeam as a company and some of the specific things we have that, one, help make us more resilient against ransomware or help us in a recovery situation should we be compromised. So to kind of lead us off there, we'll kind of talk about what are some of the most common infection methods that we see. And this is just kind of to familiarize ourselves with the terminology we may be using down the road in the presentation. But I think a lot of us are familiar with things like Trojans. That's probably one of the most common attack vectors to get into the environment. Removable media. This story I like kind of in the shaded text is really interesting. But it doesn't always have to be a super elegant hacking, coding, algorithm type deal. In this one study done by Google, they actually just dropped USB drives in a parking lot of a company, and they found about nearly half of those dropped kind of bait USB sticks were picked up by a user, plugged into the computer on the network, and thus could be an attack vector to deliver ransomware into the environment. So not always something that's super complex and elegant. It can really be basic social engineering. Malvertising we're seeing this a lot more and more with online ads becoming more prevalent everywhere, using those as a vector to gain a click and then do malicious actions in the background. Social media and SMS, again, like malvertising, becoming much, much bigger of an issue nowadays as these become more prevalent, not only in our day-to-day lives, but our business life, right? LinkedIn, Teams, text message, using that for work. Things of that nature can also definitely be used as an attack vector. So all things we want to keep in mind when we're kind of thinking about what we're actually protecting against here. Specific example, actually stateside here, I'm in, like James said, the Alpharetta office, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. But what we're really talking about here is the cost of ransomware, and that's really a universal language there. So this specific example was the city of Baltimore. They were hit with ransomware, plus the 76,000 Bitcoin bounty, or $76,000 bounty in Bitcoin. They ended up not paying the ransomware, and really what I like to talk about here is the twofold cost. One, the roughly $10 million they spent in new infrastructure to replace everything, but that other cost vector, that $8 million, was actually from lost revenue. So not able to take online payments and things of that nature while they were out. Almost equaled the cost of the actual infrastructure to replace everything. So when we talk to folks about either being prepared for a ransomware issue or something of that nature, we like to not only think about the cost of the actual IT services, the hardware, the software on there, but also what would we lose from a business perspective? What services are down? What employee productivity are we losing? Revenue streams that we're losing during that time? Because all of that is included in that cost of ransomware. And kind of a good segue into this slide here is kind of the cost of ransomware, both in bounties and just recovery costs. We're seeing a rise from $325 million, which sounds like a big number, but compared to where we're at now, pretty tiny, back in 2015, up to $11.5 billion in 2019. So, and you can see that's only increasing, and we expect it to increase as these attack vectors become more prevalent. So really kind of to dial in, we're going to talk about the Veeam solution for this after we kind of give an outline of what we're seeing in the industry, talk about Veeam as a company, who we are, what we do for those unfamiliar, and then dial into, one, some specific resiliency techniques with your backup application, as well as some specific features within Veeam, both for your local backups and your offsite copies, such as your Rogers Cloud Connect, that can help us be more resilient against a possible ransomware threat. So I'll kind of try to keep these slides relatively brief, but like I said, I do want to familiarize everybody with Veeam as a company, as a vendor, if you're not already. And you can see just some high-level numbers. We surpassed 1 billion in revenue last year, a great NPS score that we are extremely proud of. And if you're not familiar with that, pretty much how likely would you be to recommend this solution to a friend or colleague? That's what that NPS score gives. So being so high up on that list, we take great pride in that because we think we've built a really strong ecosystem, both in R&D, support, and our partners, such as Rogers. This slide kind of just backtracks our history a little bit. We started out specifically as a virtual backup company, VMware to be exact, have since expanded into Hyper-V, physical workloads, AHV, and like James mentioned, Office 365 data, which we'll get to in a bit. But specifically, some of the things we'll be talking about are some of those newer developments. So if you see in the bottom right, Q1 of 2019, we'll talk about some of those cloud storage options and secure restore that we think have really taken a good approach to being resilient in that ransomware situation. And this is one of the last slides before we kind of get into the specifics, but specifically I wanted to kind of lay out the Veeam portfolio, right? That's who we are as a company, but specifically from the technology we offer, what are we looking at, right? Specifically, we'll be talking about backup and replication for the most part. That's Veeam's solution, piece of software that backs up on-prem virtual workloads, VMware Hyper-V, physical like we talked about. You can kind of see the list of different supported vendors there. So that's what we'll be talking about for the most part, but you can kind of see it is that core piece in an entire portfolio that ranges from monitoring software, DR orchestration, things of that nature. But today, like I said, we're going to kind of hone in a bit on backup and replication and what it can do for us. Going to kind of take some of James' thunder there with the 3-2-1 rule. And what we like to do at Veeam is actually add on an additional piece to that. And we kind of call it the 3-2-1-0 rule. So we have our 3 different copies, 2 different media types, 1 offsite. But we also want to make sure we have 0 errors. So that gets into backup coverability verification, testing of our DR plan, things of that nature. So really when we talk about that holistic disaster recovery plan, recovering the event of a ransomware issue, the 3-2-1-0 rule is really where we'd like to be. To get at that a little bit, a specific feature in our kind of backup verification technology is what we call secure restore. So to give you a little background, Veeam has functionality within that backup and replication software to boot up our VMs, verify that they're recoverable so that we know going in, hey, our backups are good to boot. What we've done, as we saw in that timeline in Q1 of 2019, was add a secure restore. That within that actual kind of isolated testing environment, we can reach out and talk to our AV vendor and scan those images with updated AV signatures. That can be done on an automated testing basis, maybe on our quarterly DR test. It can also be done as a step in a recovery process after a possible ransomware effect. So if it's a case where we've been infected with ransomware, it's made it into the environment, we're going to go ahead and restore from our backups, we want to make sure that that bad data, that ransomware, isn't there anymore, right? It's not a day 0 attack where it infected, sat kind of quietly for a month or 2, and then blew up and infected. We restore last night's backup, we've just restored the ransomware right back to where it was. So what this secure restore functionality lets us do is kind of in line in that recovery process, put this VM into an isolated network, scan it with the most updated AV signatures, 6-month-old backup, scan it with today's signatures, and make sure we don't have that malware in our backup image, kind of going undetected before our AV signatures caught it. So you can kind of see that timeline of the actual day 0 attack and recovery. So in the past 1.5 years since this has been released, we're seeing a lot of good feedback from customers on this one. A little bit of a technical breakdown on kind of how that's working. I alluded to it at a high level in terms of how we're going to boot this machine up into an isolated network to accomplish the scans. And you can tell Veeam as an automated process what to do depending on the results. So if we find malware, do we abort the recovery? Or do we maybe just strip all the network adapters so you can go in there and clean what you need to and then put it back onto the production network? So it really gives you that flexibility to make sure what you're bringing back isn't also bad data and automate what we want to do depending on the results. Switching a little bit from the on-prem backups to our secondary copy, right? So a lot of times if there's a local attack, local backups have been compromised, our cloud-based storage is there to protect us, right? That's what we're going to download from and restore. But we also have to make sure that's protected as well. Rogers and our other providers do a great job of doing that, but you do have credentials as an end user to that cloud storage. So if an internal attack happens and they gain access to your on-prem backup server, it is possible that they could get those Cloud Connect credentials, connect to the Cloud Connect and delete it. It has been seen before. Most backup vendors that are popular enough suffer from this type of attack. So what we've done with our Cloud Connect providers is build a feature called Insider Protection. And what this does is like James talked about, that off-site cloud repository, gives you almost an invisible recycle bin. So when you go to Rogers and you start backing up into their cloud repository, they have to provide you credentials to connect via SSL connection to send that data. Those credentials have access to only see specific things in the Rogers environment. What you can't see is that recycle bin. So if for whatever reason, whether it be ransomware or maybe even malicious insider possibly, somehow gets to those backups and deletes them, we have a invisible to us copy that then our providers such as Rogers can load back into us for us to restore from. So we've seen many times where this was able to save us not only from ransomware, but accidental deletion, malicious deletion, which can happen. So really one of those key factors in making sure that not only do we have an offsite copy, but that offsite copy is protected as well.
Robert, I've heard this be referred to as 3-2-1+1 in some instances, where you've got truly an air-gapped copy that provides just that extra level of protection when it comes to really providing a bit of a firewall around that data store that's backed up in the cloud from some of these ransomware attack vectors.
Exactly. And I like the 3-2-1+1. I haven't heard that before. I'm definitely going to use it. But I like it because a lot of times we say that that offsite copy is that accomplishes the rule, right? But a lot of times that's online. So if there's a connection to it with credentials that can be compromised, there's still an attack vector there. So really what we want is that +1 to be offline or immutable or hidden from the end user, which is exactly what we accomplished with that insider protection. Great point there. Alrighty, so the other type of cloud would be, so we've talked about kind of our disk cloud repository as a Cloud Connect backup. We also do integrate with object storage. So S3 API is definitely the most prevalent, whatever flavor that may come in. We do integrate, and a lot of folks like this because it's more geared for dense, deeper storage, just based on kind of how object storage at a nuts and bolts level is configured. So that is a really big popular option with users trying to move from maybe a tape-based backup or some type of removable offsite drives to a more cloud mobile option that doesn't take much hand-holding. And one of the things that has really come out recently with S3-based object storage that is getting a lot of folks more on the bandwagon because they feel more secure is the immutability feature in the backup. If you haven't heard of immutable backups or immutable storage in object storage, I definitely recommend kind of doing a little bit of research on it. But what it does is it almost acts as, at least the way it makes sense to me, is worm media, if anyone's familiar. Mostly used with tape, write once, read many. Gives you that locked copy, that locked version, if you will, of that file or that data block that we send there. So that if kind of like the insider protection, nuts and bolts, they work a little differently, but they give you kind of the end result, same end result. So if we back up to immutable object storage, and you try to delete the backups out of the Veeam console, maybe accidentally or again possibly malicious user, we'll get a big red X saying, hey, it's immutable, we can't delete it. Even if we go into that storage account, Rogers Object Storage, AWS, whatever that S3 storage might be, and get root account privileges and try to delete it, it gives us a version, almost like that insider protection, to roll back to. That can't be deleted for X amount of days. So that we've seen a lot of momentum around object storage with. It is having that kind of like what James and I just mentioned, that 1+1, where not only is the copy off site, but it's offline and or immutable. All right. So to pivot a little bit from the backup and replication software, we talked about kind of how we can leverage antivirus to scan those backups with updated signatures and make sure we're not restoring bad data, how we can leverage an offsite copy of our backup with Veeam and make that more than just offsite, but also protected while offsite. But to kind of pivot into another piece of the Veeam portfolio, Veeam One. So typically, Veeam Backup and Replication and Veeam One are purchased together. It's called our Veeam Availability Suite. They can be purchased standalone, but typically they're used in conjunction. And what this does, it's a holistic monitoring solution that doesn't just look at backup activity, but also just monitors your VMware or Hyper-V environment, completely separate of Veeam. And what we can do there is do things like monitor on possible ransomware activity, suspiciously large backup size, because a lot of times if there's a ransomware infection, your incremental backup, those changes that are usually small every night, balloons up because we see the data is all new because it just got encrypted. So we have an alarm that says, hey, if your incremental, your nightly jobs go from maybe 10 gigs a night to 400 gigs, something may be up there, we can alarm and then proactively go in and see what's going on there. So Veeam One has a lot of features that we can use outside of just making sure we have a disaster recovery plan, but actually get proactive in our monitoring, and a lot of powerful things there. So if disaster strikes, so we have our monitoring, we have our backups, but that ransomware, it made its way into our environment through whichever way. Really what Veeam stresses is we provide the ability to take this data, make it really portable, put it in different places to recover no matter what the situation. But when you're talking a disaster recovery plan, we need more than that. We need a plan. That includes things like support vendor information, not just for backup, but applications that are running in production. We need to take orders. We need to make sure that if there is an issue when we come back up, everybody knows where to go to have that resolved. So things of that nature, defining our SLAs, making sure everyone's on the same page is really something we like to stress outside of just the particular features in our software that can help. Because I like to say there's never going to be a checkbox that says stop ransomware, and that's all we do. It's never going to be that easy. So it really is that holistic plan that Veeam can really power and help drive. Some things you may want to look into if that interests you. I like to think about infrastructure as code as part of this. So we have a lot of kind of interesting activity on our Veeam GitHub around kind of automating the recovery and playbooks and things like that. So there's a really strong ecosystem, not only around backup, of course, but also disaster recovery and kind of the things around backup that also are required when you think about that coming back up from disaster. And the last thing we wanted to talk about, at least from the Veeam specific end, like James said, was we were going to talk a little bit about 365. So the ransomware discussion doesn't also end here, by the way, guys. If you haven't seen, there are some YouTube videos and articles coming about ransomware in Office 365. Specifically, the YouTube video I saw was a email attack. So phishing email was sent that then encrypted the user's emails in real time, and we had to pay Bitcoin to get our emails back. So when we talk about 365, there's a lot of discussion around, does Microsoft protect that data? And from a backup and retention perspective, we can talk about the shared responsibility model and kind of who it falls to at the end of the day to protect that stateful data, but we can also have things like ransomware in 365 that we can help protect from as well. But,
Robert, I'll just add on the Microsoft side, because the adoption of 365 has been, I mean, so rapid, so quick. And when we think sort of back to where our starting state was with the Office environments, we were typically running, an Outlook, an Exchange server on-prem. And, because these were running on-prem, they were typically included in, just the core enterprise sort of backup schedule and routine, right? As we move to 365, there has been, some of this, I would say, assumption that, hey, the data is protected. And what we've seen is, particularly in industries where there is 7-year retention or lifetime retention, that some of that compliance-driven need was lost. And what something like the Veeam backup technology allows is, to really continue to drive and get the benefit of the cloud. There's no going back from 365, right? The collaboration that it enables, not just in Teams, but across all of the environments, the productivity suite and so on, is here to stay. But the need to back up has not gone away. The need to be compliant has not. And so technologies like the Veeam backup for 365 allow that data store that, contains the Teams messaging, the SharePoint files, the OneDrive files, to all be sort of copied to a separate location that's secure and air gap from that 365 environment. And just so much of the modern business is running on Office now. I think it goes without saying the importance of getting Microsoft back into, call it that standard backup schedule and routine.
Agreed. I think that's a great way to put it. And the Veeam backup for 365 was actually one of our fastest growing products. With recent times, COVID and everything, it's quickly become our fastest growing product. So there is definitely more awareness around the need to back up the stateful data as that usage just skyrockets. But I think it definitely needs to be harped on more, that just because that Exchange server is now in Microsoft and they're guaranteeing that you will be able to send and receive email 24/7, the actual data, the contents of that email is not Microsoft's responsibility at the end of the day, and it's still ours to make sure, either for compliance or regulatory needs, that we take responsibility of that and protect that data.
Great. I think we're just about to move into our Q&A segment. So one thing we'd like to leave the audience with, and just really recognizing, I think, many of the challenges that we're all encountering, over the last 6 months or so, particularly with the desire to keep, IT workers and employees safe out of the offices and so on. We believe cloud backup is a great way to mitigate some of these intrinsic risks. And so we're very pleased to be able to provide promotion around our Cloud Connect product. And this, again, was really the cloud-based technology that interworks with the Veeam backup and replication stack to allow the cloud to be a target for those Veeam backups. And of course, this includes what we actually call Ransom Guard, but that insider protection capability that provides that virtual recycle bin or air-gapped sort of virtual tape copy, if you will, that only Rogers can access, which means that any malware, any employee that is acting with bad intent can't reach that copy. It is only, the keys, if you will, are only in the hands of Rogers. So it just provides that extra level of protection. And so with that, we'd like to introduce Samiti, who's our moderator today. Samiti, any questions that we need to answer?
Yes, thank you, James and Robert. We have a few questions here. Does cloud protect my workloads from data loss and failure?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think we've answered it to an extent. And the simple answer is no. I think that concept of shared responsibility is something that every organization that's looking at the cloud needs to be familiar with. And what that shared responsibility says is that the cloud provider is effectively responsible for the core infrastructure, meaning as Microsoft or as AWS, I'm going to keep the data center running. I'm going to keep the compute running. I'm going to keep the storage running. But the security and the protection of data is ultimately the customer's responsibility. And so it's very important as you consider cloud to ensure that, in the context of that business continuity plan, that you've assessed the risks in terms of data loss, in terms of downtime and so forth, as part of that shared responsibility model, and that you've put the right mitigation and protection in place. The great thing about technologies like Veeam and Veeam Cloud Connect is they interoperate with the cloud. And so they're not technologies that are designed, just for traditional on-prem. The Cloud Connect technology really supports protecting workloads no matter where they are. And of course, the data stores can be protected as part of that Veeam solution using the Cloud Connect technology in one of our data centers. Robert, there's anything you would add?
Well said. No, I think we actually kind of got to that right before it was asked. So yeah, that kind of end story, the overarching theme of the actual data is not what's guaranteed. It's the service in those environments, and that exchange, that SharePoint data is still subject to the 3-2-1 rule, even though we're now hosting it in Microsoft's cloud.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, we used to take tape backups of our data pre-COVID. Can we adopt a cloud backup solution without any downtime?
Yeah, another great question. And I think one of the challenges through COVID, and again, we touched on this, is that typically tape rotation it's a manual process, right? So it requires someone either to be dispatched and visit a data center location. If the infrastructure is in a data center, for many businesses where they host data in a wiring closet or a server room, there's typically an administrative staff that rotates the tapes, packs them up into that Iron Mountain box, and basically couriers them off to the archival location. And with employees, for the most part, outside of the office, a lot of businesses kind of put on hold or paused their tape rotation. And of course, that presents a pretty significant challenge and risk, because that's going to erode our ability to recover data if there was a failure. And so something like the Cloud Connect allows that same enterprise backup technology that is already being used but is being consumed or perhaps backed up to tape. That same environment now can be backed up to the cloud. And so the actual change from tape to cloud, it's very straightforward, very simple, couple of mouse clicks, and essentially you're able to move from that on-prem tape to a cloud-based backup.
Agreed. And I think you really hit the ease of how quickly we can get a backup going to a Cloud Connect provider. It really is just a couple of clicks at a Veeam job to set our schedule, say what we want to back up and for how long. So really there is no downtime there, and saves us a lot of time.
Great. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
Thank you. Our next question is, our concern about transitioning data to cloud is lack of visibility around data residency, sovereignty, and compliance. How can we move across these barriers?
So this one for me and as Rogers, very close to our hearts. And I think, there is, of course, with that acceleration in cloud technology, an increase, I think, in awareness around what it means to be data resident versus data sovereign versus and what that means from a data jurisdiction perspective. And the story kind of goes a little bit like this, where when we think about data residency is really being able to point to a location, a province, or a country and say, hey, that's where the data is being located. Data sovereignty and data jurisdiction is really about saying and being able to point to, well, where does the law sort of govern access to that data? And as Canadians, privacy is extremely important to us. We, in fact, have some of the best sort of privacy controls and protection in the world. So we know it's a critical consideration for Canadian businesses as they look at the cloud. And when we think of data jurisdiction, we know that, and we're sorry, Robert, but from a U.S. standpoint, U.S. law considers clouds that are operated by U.S. entities, whether it's AWS or Microsoft Azure, to fall into U.S. jurisdiction. And so it means that if your data is hosted, even if it's in Canada, but with a U.S.-based entity, U.S. law applies in terms of who can access and who can request access to that, to that data. Working with a Canadian-based organization such as Rogers means that data falls under Canadian jurisdiction, because Rogers follows Canadian law, and of course we follow Canadian law when it comes to privacy and data access. So I think it's a great question. It's something that obviously has long-term implications for the cloud, but just keep in mind and consider those concepts of residency versus jurisdiction and what the implications are for your data.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add there. I think that definitely was a question on the Rogers end for that Canadian kind of keeping the data there. But from the Veeam end, I just like to harp on the fact that we are working with our partners like Rogers to really enable them to do what they do best: serve their Canadian customers, offer that data sovereignty, and really bring value to them rather than kind of tie into whatever we decide to use. So we really, really value that partner ecosystem with Rogers specifically and what they're able to bring around that type of requirements.
Thanks, Robert. Our next question is, how can we get a quotation for the service from quote to implementation? How long does the process take approximately?
Yeah, I mean, I'll obviously take that one, and what I'll speak more to is just the implementation. And so really what's required, and what I would call it as the prerequisite, is you're going to want to be a consumer or user of Veeam, backup and replication software. If you're using Veeam today, the Cloud Connect feature, which is the capability that allows you to target the cloud, it's already built in. So you actually already own that feature. And so the next step is really, ordering the Cloud Connect service from Rogers. We deliver that as a fully automated workflow. So what that means is you'll receive a set of credentials, same business day that you essentially cut and paste into your Veeam console. Once you've entered your credentials, you can effectively start targeting your next backup job into the cloud. And so many organizations go from purchase to actual cloud backup within a business day. Very straightforward. And from a quote perspective, we'll have a sales rep reach out and get you a quote. It's very straightforward. There's a charge based on the number of VMs or physical servers, and then there's a charge for the storage. And of course, one of the benefits of Rogers is there's no cost from a network perspective, meaning we don't charge to egress or upload your data into our cloud.
Thanks, James. Our next question is, I don't have a dedicated IT prime, and it has always been a deterrent in adopting cloud for our company. How can I begin my path to digital transformation and ensure that business and customer data is secure?
Sure, and I think the journey to cloud is it's complex, right? And we hear from Canadian business that it's overwhelming, that it's challenging to find the right skills. There's even the question of where to begin on that journey. And what digital transformation success really depends on is a partner that can act as that trusted advisor. And so working with a service provider such as Rogers that is really full service, meaning we don't just focus on providing, the cloud servers and the cloud storage. We focus on delivering the outcome and the solution to our customers. And so there'll be someone from Rogers really, with your IT staff, at every step of that journey, ensuring they understand how the technology works, what the best practices are, and when it becomes time to implement, that there is a professional services team that is there not just to help deliver the product, but is also there to onboard you and ensure that on day two, you've got the capabilities to operate and manage the technology yourself. And so, it is that trusted sort of advisor that really helps organizations succeed in this domain.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. Our guests are requesting to provide the link again for GitHub.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. That link, yeah, there's really good stuff around automating your Veeam deployment there. We'll get that out to the participants.
And while we are waiting for that, we're also getting asked if a recording of this session will be shared. The answer to that is yes, we will be sharing a recording of this session within the next 24 hours with all of you.
Perfect, and that GitHub link should be there.
Okay. Okay, it's been the GitHub link has been posted in chat.
Thanks, guys. Sorry, I was just talking on mute there. So, Robert, with that, I'd really like to thank you for your participation today. I think it was a real honor to have access to, obviously, your technical expertise on the Veeam platform and technology. I certainly learned a few things that I didn't know that the product was delivering today in terms of really managing ransomware, not just in terms of mitigating, but helping protect on some of the recovery activities, which are so important to prevent that reinfection, if you will, at the time of recovery. So appreciate that. And so with that, I'd like to thank the audience and remind everyone that you can learn more about our upcoming events at rogers.com/DC events. Thank you very much.
Thanks.